Hello, all you Chaos Terminators and Primaris Captains in Gravis armor. My name's Salamander, and I am an unironic fan of the Gathering Storm event. I think the fall of Cadia, the reawakening of Robude Guilliman, and the launch of the 13th Black Crusade was one of the best things to ever happen to the 40k universe, given that beforehand, the lore had almost completely calcified since the release of 3rd edition in 1998. Marked by nearly 2 decades of theoretically impactful events which never actually left any long-lasting legacy within the universe, like the Damocles Gulf Crusade, the Wars for Armageddon, and, oh hey, would you look at that, the 13th Black Crusade! Characters like Eldrad were repeatedly killed off and then inexplicably came back, not because Eldrad's some sort of perpetual like Vulcan, but just because that's the way 40k sort of worked in the interim between 3rd edition and late 7th edition. Nothing was actually allowed to have a meaningful enough long-term impact on the universe that, for instance, named codex like Ghazghkull or Karn were allowed to be killed off, or develop at all as characters, really. Even if that means characters like Ursarkar Creed, who is canonically only 50 years old, appear as the Imperial Commander and Governor Primus of Cadia for centuries. However, literally all of that changed with the release of the Gathering Storm event and the subsequent release of 8th edition. As the destruction of Cadia swung open the gate for chaos to invade the galaxy in greater numbers than even the Horus Heresy, so too did the destruction of Cadia swing open the gate for new lore! The Ultima founding led to thousands of new chapters being created. Successor chapters of the Space Wolves are now possible, and chapters like the Salamanders, or the Scythes of the Emperor, who had previously been on the verge of extinction, were now back to full chapter strength. Sadly, nothing of this scale happens without some level of friction, and I think the reintroduction of Rowboat Guilliman exposes the somewhat toxic relationship 40k has with the Horus Heresy. So, in general, the Horus Heresy is a pretty interesting time period in the 40k universe, where Space Marines are deployed in similar numbers to Astra Militarum troops, and the Solar Auxilia are fielded in numbers that would make the Tyranids seem like an elite army. It was a time of excess, the Imperium at its peak in strength, so the war that split it apart was fittingly excessive to match. However, and this is important for the next bit I'm going to say, the Imperium during the Great Crusade and the subsequent interlegionary civil war materially functioned no differently than the Imperium of the 41st millennium. It was not any more of a fundamentally fairer, less horribly xenophobic society. You could even make the argument that in a lot of ways the Imperium during the Heresy was a great deal more genocidal than the current Imperium, given that they were in the midst of a massive anti-Xenos extermination campaign that spanned the entire Milky Way galaxy. All that is to say, the Imperium of Man in the Horus Heresy is still often portrayed as the pure, uncorrupted, unquestionably good society that the current Imperium is now a shell of. Specifically, that the Emperor's intentions and plan for humanity were pure, but were then corrupted after his pseudo-death via internal subversion. So, if the Imperium of Man in the 31st millennium was xenophobic, expansionist, imperialist, violently resistant to the introduction of new ideas or opposing ideologies, formed around a cult of personality dedicated to pseudo-worship and obedience toward the Emperor of Mankind, and the Imperium of Man in the 41st millennium is xenophobic, expansionist, imperialist, violently resistant to the introduction of new ideas or opposing ideologies, formed around a cult dedicated to worship and obedience toward the God Emperor, then it seems like the core difference between the 31st Millennium Imperium and the Imperium of the 41st Millennium is that they dropped the pseudo from their worship. And this is also the primary problem with Romano Guilliman, because Gillard and his Primaris Marines are the Horus Heresy era Imperium, risen from the grave 10,000 years later. And when I say that Ronan Gersmont and the Primaris Marines are the Horus Heresy, I mean that everything, thematically, visually, and narratively, points to them serving the role as a representation of the Imperium being reformed to reach the heights it once had during the Great Crusade. grav vehicles, helmets made to intentionally invoke the visage of Maximus pattern power armor, and G-Man's own hatred of the Imperial cult invites the idea that the Indominus Crusade is, in a strange way, a sequel to the Great Crusade, a return to form for the Imperium that represents it moving forward toward a more Horus Heresy-era mindset. Space Marines have begun legion building again. The primarchs are slowly but surely returning to the galaxy. We're ramping up for a Horus Heresy 2 Electric Boogaloo, and it's spearheaded by supposedly sweeping ideological change that Rowan Captain and Gravis Armor plans on implementing. However, what are his actual ideological problems with the Imperium of Man? Well, let's hear it straight from the horse's mouth, shall we?
Why do I still live? What more do you want from me? I gave everything I had to you, to them. Look what they've made of our dream. This bloated, rotting carcass of an empire driven not by reason and hope, but by fear, hate, and ignorance. Better we had all burned in the fire of Horus's ambition than live to see this.
So, his problem with the Imperium is that it's driven by fear, hate, and ignorance, instead of the way it was ran before and during the heresy, which according to him was by reason and hope. But as we've previously established, the reason and hope which drove the Imperium of Man still led to people toiling their lives away in manufactorums, surviving off of corpse starch rations, and being conscripted into armies of countless nameless soldiers to genocide and purge the galaxy of non-humans. The practice of using servitors, lobotomized and effectively brain-dead cybernetic slaves, was done during this golden age of the Imperium that Guilliman wants to return to. And yet we're supposed to view him as a beacon of progress within the Imperium, the hero who's trying to turn the tides of fate in favor of the Imperium instead of against it, when all he's really doing is opposing the theocratic fascism of the Imperium with secular fascism. It's hard to see him as a hero, when his vision of an ideal future still has concentration camps and hive cities. As seen in Hammer and Bolter Episode 6 in the Garden of Ghosts, the Ynnari having a big part to play in his own resurrection has not softened G-Man's or his Legion's perception of Xenos. He refuses to let Belisarius Cawl utilize the gene seed of his traitor brothers to form new chapters, even if it means greatly increasing the number of soldiers they could bring to bear against the enemies of the Imperium, which he totally ended up ignoring and doing anyway. No, I'm sorry, the Sons of the Phoenix are Imperial Fist successors, and while we're at it, I'm a cis woman. And according to my YouTube analytics, most of the people who watch my videos are in their 20s and 30s, so I know that we're all mature adults here who can have a nuanced conversation about this. I'm not saying the problem with Guilliman is that he's a bigot in universe. I don't care if a character in a story that isn't real is racist towards aliens who also aren't real. What I am saying is that this is a toothless, clumsy, and self-contradictory way to tell this character's story. Simultaneously deeply opposed to the ideology of the current Imperium, but not in any way that actually matters. Because he's not opposed to the horrible living conditions his subjects live under. He's not opposed to the bigoted exterminationist foreign policy of his empire. He's just opposed to his father being worshipped as a god instead of like a god. G-Man, I'm sorry, but your father literally went around wearing a f***ing halo and adorning himself in golden armor. He literally named the meeting of all his most important people to discuss the legitimacy of studying and utilizing the warp as a weapon, the Council of Nicaea. He destroyed all Terran religion and then built an empire off of those religions' imagery. What the f*** did either of you expect? At that point, complaining that people are worshipping your father as a god is practically a semantics argument. So, let's take a breather. Let's refresh our minds on everything that's been said so far. Guilliman, as a character, was brought back to represent the changing tides of the 40k universe. From a 2-decade-long era of stagnation and stalemates, Guilliman arose to signal that things would finally be allowed to change in the 40k universe. However, that change ended up being much less substantial than it initially promised to be, and now we're basically just stuck with the same status quo as before, but with nominally different priorities, and also new toys for Loyalist Marines to play with. So, where do we go from here? Well, thankfully there is actually a character who is quite adjacent to Guilliman, who serves a very similar role in the plot, but is, at least in my opinion, executed much better. Belisarius Call. Nobody tells Call what to do. He regularly disobeys his superiors when it's more efficient to do so, and cares little for the dogmatism of the Imperium. But this actually manifests in interesting and deep ways. He and Trazen the Infinite are homies, and work together to try and stop the formation of the Cicatrix Maledictum. As mentioned previously, he pretty clearly uses the gene seed of traitor Primarchs to create chapters of Primaris Marines like the Sons of the Phoenix or the Soul Drinkers, the latter of which is literally a former Chaos Warband who was wiped out and then remade as a Loyalist chapter by Call. If you get in the way of what Call wants to do, he just ignores you and does it anyway. The Primarch of the Ultramarines and the Archmagos Dominus both have the whole disillusioned at the current state of the Imperium deal, but where Guilliman broods in corners over people worshipping his all-powerful, omnipotent father who kills anyone who doesn't obey his will as a god, Call realizes there's bigger prizes to be won. His ideological differences with the Imperium seem so much less surface level than the Primarch because of how much farther he acts on those differences, and this in general just makes him a much more interesting and unique character. Guilliman, as it stands, is a largely toothless and impotent protagonist character, because he does nothing to fundamentally differentiate himself from the thing he supposedly opposes, and leaves no significant lasting impact on the galaxy. And that is Warhammer's Guilliman problem. Hey, so I know that recently I've been telling y'all to like and subscribe a lot, but that's only because I'm getting really close to 1,000 subscribers, to the point where I have an announcement to make. If we get to 1,000 subscribers, I will do a 24-hour live stream where I play as many of the Warhammer games as I have in my library on Steam, which is a lot. I counted it, and it's like, it's whatever number is on screen right now. It's a lot. It's a lot. But yeah, I've been doing this whole Warhammer 40k content creation thing for like 2 years now, almost, and I've been having a ton of fun. So, if you want to see me make more of these videos, which I have no intention of stopping, by the way, but if you want to see them come out more frequently, or have a higher production quality, you can go down into the description and support me on Patreon for $1 a month. And with that $1 a month, you get to vote on video topics as one of the many perks. In fact, this video was the result of one of those Patreon polls. So, if you want to see these videos come out more often, be of a higher quality, and also have some input on what videos get made, as well as being able to hang out in a really cool community full of people on a Discord server where we talk about Space Marines having lunch, you can do that below. And yeah, that's it. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful day. Bye.